Welcome, everybody, here to another masterclass in Mind for All Seasons. We're so excited that you're here. And if you saw the little teaser that Randy put out today, this is going to be about creatine. And a lot of people hear creatine and they instantly think bodybuilding. And creatine isn't just about bodybuilding. The latest research really is about brain health and how creatine affects cognition. So, Randy, we're excited to learn. I'll hand it off to your capable hands, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end for everybody.
Okay, sounds good. So Eric teed it up perfect. Is creatine good for the brain, not just good for the bodybuilders? So my objectives for today's masterclass, number one, is just introduce you to what creatine is. It's a supplement that you can buy at Walmart. And I think the quality at Walmart's fine. This isn't a really sensitive or specific supplement. It's pretty simple to make. I want to talk about what its potential role is, and I'm going to talk about everything, but then I'm going to end my presentation focusing on brain health and share with you some case studies. And my last thing is I'm going to teach you how to administer it so that you don't need a doctor on board. You could buy this over the counter and you could do some of your own trials. Okay. You'll see these pictures at the bottom of my screen for creatine. I thought this was interesting. This creatine monohydrate has D3 and K2 in it. I hadn't seen that before, so I thought that was pretty interesting. This Orgain in the blue label is creatine from Costco. That's Costco's brand. Okay. I don't have any allegiance to any form of creatine, so I'm just putting these out there so that you can kind of see it in your mind. How do I get this stuff? Where do I get it? What's it for? So what is creatine? It's a naturally occurring compound that lives in your muscles. When it's in our muscles, it's stored as a molecule called phosphocreatine. So we get creatine from the store, it's just creatine monohydrate. But when we consume it, the body converts it into phosphocreatine, okay, in the body, and it plays a role in energy production. Now, we could spend hours talking about the impact of ATP, and I'm not going to. I'm going to make the assumption that you all know that if your ATP stores are low, you don't have any energy. And in the brain, your body has exquisite amounts of ATP. And if ATP becomes depleted in the brain, you can't function. Maybe we could say sundowning is a loss of ATP in the brain. Okay? Creatine, when you buy it from the store, is derived from amino acids. So you can think of it kind of like a mini protein drink. Everyone buys protein drinks. Well, creatine just has 3 amino acids, whereas most protein supplements have 20. Or if you buy branched chain amino acids, they have really high dose of about 4 or 5. So it's kind of, if you will, a type of a protein drink, but it's really focused on these 3 molecules grouped together, okay? And for the science buffs, I'm doing more and more training to physicians, and so I always have to include the physiology, the science, so they get it. Arginine is what you read about when people say, I take beets. I use super beets after my workout. It's because it's really loaded in arginine. Glycine is an amino acid for muscle tissue, and methionine is probably the most ubiquitous amino acid on planet Earth. It's in everything. When these 3 things get combined, it creates creatine. And then our body converts that creatine to a phosphocreatine. And you see this ADP to ATP here? This is where phosphocreatine helps convert energy that's been used, ADP, into ATP, which is energy that's available for use. And the byproduct of when you convert ADP to ATP is water. So it's a very hydrating supplement. I'll talk more about the hydration benefits associated with creatine. So you can see the implication in a senior population that are largely dehydrated, don't get enough to drink. Creatine can help retain water and create fluid status in the body. And then this green molecule, creatinine, I'm going to talk about because there's a little bit of a myth that if you take creatine, it's going to injure your kidneys. because we measure kidney function by measuring this molecule called creatinine, and it's not the same thing. It's kind of confusing to the lay people, and I would say it's kind of confusing to doctors as well. Doctors don't really understand the difference between creatine and creatinine. I know this because I'm visiting with physicians all the time, and they ask me these questions, okay? So, how does it actually work? Well, when you do exercise or when your brain does work, when you're reading your Bible, this discussion we just had, when you're doing energy, when you're doing neurological work, ATP releases a phosphate and it makes ADP. You've used that energy, right? So the difference between those two is a phosphate group. Well, the phosphate to resupply ADP into ATP comes from phosphocreatine. So this would, once you use the ATP in the form of energy, phosphocreatine allows you to reconvert ADP into ATP. And it helps support these short bursts of energy, and it improves muscle function. And it, because its byproduct is water, it improves cellular hydration. So where do we get it? What's the source? Your bodies make creatine every day. You make it in the liver, the kidneys, and the pancreas. We can also get creatine from our diet. We get it mostly from red meat, but we can get a little bit from fish. And I want you to know there's absolutely no plant source of creatine, none. So now plants do have amino acids in them. But then what happens is you're relying on your body to take the right grouping of amino acids and make phosphocreatine. If you just eat meat, you get creatine from the meat. And when you get it in supplement form, the most studied, the most safe, the most beneficial, the most absorbable, the most physiologically adaptive is called creatine monohydrate. Don't get sucked into other fancy forms of creatine. There's 4 or 5 kinds, and I was going to spend time on it. And I thought, no, it'll just confuse people. Just use creatine monohydrate. Well, what's the time like? Creatine was first identified 200 years ago, 100 and what, 95 years ago. And it became very, very popular in sports nutrition in the 1990s because athletes recognized when they would load creatine, their explosiveness and their muscle performance and muscle recovery got better. It became very widely studied. There's been thousands of articles on creatine, all of which support its use. In fact, it's argued to be the most effective ergogenic aid on the planet, meaning that ergogenic means that it enhances energy production and improves athletic performance. It's probably better in your pre-workout meal than caffeine. And that's hard for me to swallow because I love caffeine, right? Caffeine's pretty powerful, but creatine has some special ninja capabilities. So why would you choose to use creatine? Why would you go down to Walmart or Costco and get a tub of creatine? Because you want to improve your physical strength or build lead muscle or enhance your physical performance. Maybe you're an exerciser and you get sore and you just want to say, hey, I want to see if I could exercise for an extra 10 minutes or if I could increase my weights a little bit or if I could be less sore and feel good after my exercise. That's why you might choose to use it. So how would you use it? The general use or maintenance dosing talked about across almost all spectrums is 1 to 5 grams. Now I'm just telling you it's 5 grams, but in the research it's 1 to 5. No one takes 1 gram of creatine. I think you can get gummies or chewable tablets that are 1 gram. They're just expensive. I would just get 5 grams. It's a little scooper. It looks like a little teeny teaspoon size scooper. It's a white powder and 1 scoop is 5 grams. I'm going to be talking about evidence of a loading dose of creatine. So a loading dose would be more like 20 grams. And so some people can take it in a single dose, or maybe you split the dosing of 10 grams 2 times a day. So if a typical scooper is 5 grams, if you were to do a loading dose, you'd have to do 4 scoops of that creatine. You could put it in your morning coffee, you could put it in your protein drink, you could put it in water or Crystal Light. Creatine, I think it's tasteless. It has no taste. Some people have really sensitive taste, so I'm even hesitant to say that because as soon as I said there's no taste, someone's going to send me an email and say, I can't believe you said that. Creatine sucks. I don't like the taste of it. And I'll be like, okay, whatever. So the investigative use that I want to talk about today is specifically cognitive function. Okay? Now, listen to this statistic. 25% of all the calories you burn between your ears. There's an old joke in neurology that says if you want to lose weight, do calculus. Because the brain is exquisitely active and it's burning calories and burning energy. It's a massive engine. My wife and I have joked a lot lately because my wife's dance business is so busy right now. And she sits at the computer and she's working on judge sheets and she's working on choreography and dance routines and she has to prepare for dance competitions and write newsletters and so forth. And she'll sit at her computer for 6 hours and she'll walk away and say, oh my gosh, I'm so exhausted. And she said, I can't believe I'm so tired. I haven't done anything. And I'm like, you've been using your brain intently for 6 hours. Oh, I didn't know that burned a lot of energy. So there's a lot of investigative use for looking at this for brain fog, neurodegenerative disease, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, depression, TBI, fatigue. That's pretty cool, right? So if you're going to use it, you want to know it's at least safe. What is the safety profile? Well, generally, it's very well tolerated. Some people get a little bit of mild GI discomfort. I've known a couple of people that have told me, oh, yeah, when I use creatine, it just kind of upsets my stomach. That's often associated more in higher doses, but some people are just sensitive to things. I get it. But I want you to know it's been used extensively in long-term trials with a lot of safety data. This is very, very safe. It helps improve water retention intracellularly, which means it's very hydrating for the body. There's great evidence that there's no harm to the kidney, there's no harm to the liver in healthy individuals. The reason I say that is remember that I work with a population of seniors that oftentimes when I meet them, they already have stage 3 kidney disease as it is. They already have an elevated serum creatinine. So I just have to be aware of that. Look at baseline values. I don't think creatine makes their kidney function worse, but I am going to show you some research that creatine increases creatinine. And if we use creatinine as a measure of kidney function and creatinine goes up, that might make other practitioners think, uh-oh, they're having worse kidney function. That's not supported in the literature. That's the creatine to creatinine connection for kidney function. And so let me give you an example. When you do a metabolic panel in labs and we look at kidney function, I've highlighted those areas where we're measuring creatinine and BUN, that stands for blood urea and nitrogen, to creatinine ratio. So we have to watch these. Why? Because there could be a modest, it's really a mild increase in creatinine, which if someone already has stage 3 kidney disease and they get a mild increase in creatine, or creatinine, it's going to look like the kidney disease is getting worse. It's really just the conversion, and I'll talk about that. Some of the myths when we talk about the safety profile is that, well, it just causes kidney damage. No, it's not. I'll explain that to you. Or, well, it's like a steroid because Arnold Schwarzenegger used it, so it has a steroid-like effect. No, it doesn't. None of you are going to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger if you use creatine, trust me. And it's only used in bodybuilders. No, that's a myth. This is a very big part of biohacking and brain hacking right now in the arena. And more, I'm seeing recommendations that seniors could include the use of creatine even if they're functionally not very stable and they're using a walker and they're trying to do recovery after a total joint replacement or so forth. Okay? So, what about the use of creatine in seniors? Well, think about this. If bodybuilders use it to improve muscle strength, muscle mass, muscle function, muscle recovery, and soreness, why wouldn't a senior want to use it? It does the exact same thing physiologically in a senior that it would do in a bodybuilder, right? So of course we would want to use it. Athletes use this stuff like it's going out of style, and brain biohackers more and more are using it for improving their brain energy, improving the ATP production in the brain. How about trying to minimize and limit brain fog? Or if they have memory issues, or if they sundown, then creatine plays a role in that. And I'm going to show you the coolest study today, okay? So let's talk about that creatine to creatinine conversion in the kidneys. Scientific estimates are that about 1 to 2% of your total body creatine gets converted to creatinine, okay? In your bodies, it's estimated that you have somewhere between 120 and 140 grams of creatine. That's what you have stored in your body, your liver, your kidneys, your muscles, and so forth. And naturally, your body produces another 1 to 2 grams a day. So here's the mathematic conversion. If I take 5 additional grams and my body already has 120 to 140 grams of stored creatine, it isn't going to do anything. I'm like increasing my total body creatine stores by like less than 0.5%. And the estimation is that 5 grams of dietary creatine will increase your serum creatinine by about 0.1 milligrams per deciliter. And if you take a huge dose of creatine, look, it's relative. 20 grams is less than 10% of your total body storage at any given time. Then you could get as much as 0.2 to 0.4 increase in your serum creatinine. That's why it's important to understand this connection, because if a senior already has stage 3 kidney disease and their serum creatinine is elevated at 1.4, and then you give them a big loading dose of 20 or 30 grams, their serum creatinine might go to 1.6 or 1.7, and then you think the kidney function's getting worse, but that's probably just the creatine talking. So you just have to be aware of that. That's the kidney connection. And I think this is something that doctors are relatively unfamiliar with. Okay, I deal with this all the time in my primary care practice. So show me the research, Randy. You just shared a bunch of opinion. Let me show you the research. Well, this research article says there's a role of creatine in delaying fatigue. Now look at this article right here. This is a meta-analysis. And if you look where my cursor is, a systemic review with meta-analysis. This means that they're looking at multiple studies that are saying, could this make a difference? And they're saying, yes. Creatine is depleted very quickly in exercise, but phosphocreatine is a backup energy source in the muscle and supports that power burst during exercise. So in the same meta-analysis, they said that the direct measurement of skeletal muscle hypertrophy, you can get small increases in that. Well, is it worth it? If you asked a 75-year-old that has a hard time getting off the couch and transporting to the bathroom, don't you think they would appreciate a small increase in direct muscle hypertrophy? I think they would. They would like that. Any small increase is a benefit in a senior who's becoming disabled. This article, same meta-analysis, says that creatine is especially beneficial for those with limited workout time because it can enable a more productive training session in less time and still maximize gains. That means our seniors who are mostly stationary and they just do a little bit of walking and exercise, creatine could actually support them because they have limited workouts. The way it works in some of the research is that creatine, I'm reading the blue part, has faster calcium cycling, which enhances muscle relaxation and contraction efficiency. And it helps contribute to building strength and power gains beyond what you get when you exercise. Oh, that's so cool. I have been in hundreds of assisted living centers, and I see these exercise routines going on with individuals in their wheelchairs. And looking at that, I wonder, what if they all had a little scoop or two of creatine before they did that? Would their performance get better? Would their strength get better? Could they maintain that over time? It's a pretty interesting thought process. Creatine improves muscle recovery and is an anti-inflammatory. So look at this in the blue. Endurance athletes did high doses of creatine, a loading dose for 5 days, 20 grams. And then they measured, after they ran a half marathon, they measured inflammatory markers like tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 1b, and PGE2. It's prostaglandin that causes inflammation. They all did better when they loaded with creatine. Less post-race inflammation. That's so cool, right? I would love it if I go exercise and I'm not as sore afterwards because creatine made a difference. I've been loading up my daughter. I want to show you this. This is kind of a fun summary. My daughter went to Dallas in February and competed in a college recruiting soccer camp. My daughter will be a D1 athlete, and it's kind of fun because the coach at TCU University sent her a personal invitation. Lexi, I want to work with you at my summer camp. Please come. She's starting to get bids on D1 soccer from all across the country. Now, I have been relentless with Lexi with hydration and creatine loading prior to her exercises. I've been doing this with her now for a couple of months. Her performance is phenomenal. And I can tell you, I think creatine has played a role. And why do I say that? We were in Phoenix last week. She played a soccer game. It was 100 degrees at noon, and she played a 2-hour game against a team from Southern California. She played like a total rock star, and I could see other athletes sucking wind in the heat. They were struggling, and Lexi just killed it. I think creatine has played a role in her benefit. This article right here is on sarcopenia. Now, if you don't know what sarcopenia means, it's the medical term for age-associated muscle loss. This is why every 50-year-old is not as strong as a 40-year-old, and 60-year-olds are not as strong as when they were 50, and 70 even less so, and it's because we naturally lose muscle as we age. So they've showed that age-related muscle mass and strength starts in the 5th decade, and it contributes to an increased risk of falls or fractures. Well, this is not an article about creatine, but what I'm pointing out is if seniors are losing 1% of their muscle mass every year, darn it, can't we do something to try to protect that from them? That may be part of the role of where creatine comes into the mix. Okay? So effects of creatine and leucine on protein synthesis. This is a different study that says we conclude that short-term creatine supplementation has an anti-catabolic action in some proteins. Well, this was only a study for men, and anti-catabolic means that creatine helps protect the muscle against breakdown. That's pretty cool. Now, this study didn't have women in it. It would be nice if there was more women in it, but I'm just showing you what some of the research says. Is creatine supplementation necessary or just beneficial? Well, this was a really interesting argument because remember, there is no creatine in plant sources. So if you're a vegetarian, you're going to not get these benefits. And vegetarians have to consider that creatine is conditionally essential. There's essential nutrients and not essential nutrients. Essential means you don't get it from your diet. You have to consume it in a supplement form. Non-essential means you get it from your diet. Conditionally essential means some people get it from their diet, but if they don't eat the right diet, they don't get it. So creatine is considered a conditionally essential nutrient for the human body, depending on how much food you eat. And I have people that come into my office all the time, and they have this argument that vegetarian and veganism is healthier. And I think if you're comparing vegetarianism to the fast food standard American diet, you're probably right. But I don't think it's healthier than you got to have meat in your diet. There's so many things. I'm not I don't hate vegetarians. And sometimes when I talk like this, I offend people, and I don't want to offend anybody. I had a lady that came into my office. I saw her 4 or 5 times. She was a vegetarian. I did her labs. She was not healthy and she had all kinds of problems. And finally, on the fourth or fifth visit, I said, "You know what? I don't think I can help you. I think you should go get a second opinion." And she looked at me like, "Why?" And I said, "Because I can't overcome your diet. You are stuck in the fact that all you can eat is broccoli and lettuce and kale and vegetables and so forth. And I think that 90% of your problems are related to the fact that you don't eat animal protein. So you need to go get your health care from someone who believes in vegetarianism because I don't. And I think that's why you're not making gains." Well, trust me, it offended her. She never came back, made me sad. But I'm sharing this with you because when I was studying about creatine, it gave me another reason why I'm very guarded and cautious with a very low protein diet. I think they're problematic. Again, this is a summary about kidney function. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I already went over that. This talks about loading doses of creatine. A single 5-gram dose of creatine in a supplement is about the equivalent of eating 2 pounds of meat. If you were to eat 2 pounds of beef, you get about the same amount of creatine that you would get if you took 1 gram. So you can see that supplementing can be very beneficial. I've never sat down and eaten 2 pounds of meat, but I can drink, 20 grams of creatine, no sweat. Okay. So I'm going to go back to dosing. The general recommendation for creatine use is 5 grams a day. And they say that if you take 5 grams a day for about 3 weeks, you reach a steady state where you finally built up enough creatine that you just kind of have a steady state. So while that dose is ideal for kind of maintaining physical activity, more and more research is suggesting that higher amounts may be beneficial for bone health, brain health, supporting your immune system, and your gut health. So guidelines and recommendations are not very clear because this research continues. But because I work with such a high population of seniors, I'm really focused on how do we protect seniors through the aging process. So there's a lot of discussion in the literature that talks about, well, what are you doing this for short term? Or are you doing it for long-term gains? So we kind of have to evaluate that. A lot of the studies, they're only looking at creatine use over a 6-week study. It's really expensive to track individuals for 6 months in a placebo group and a creatine group. It just costs a fortune to do that research. So most of the studies are looking at short term. And now there's a lot more discussion about, well, what if we use this long term? What benefit could we get out of it? So I was reading an article about, does creatine support bone health? And when I read this article about, there was an article out of Brazil where they only used 3 grams of creatine. For 2 years, it did not improve bone health. But many of the researchers said that that study was underpowered. Why did they only use 3 grams? My gosh, there's research where people use 20 grams. And some researchers said if they'd used at least 8 to 10 grams, that it actually may have helped bone health. We don't know that. The jury's out. There's a lot of discussion about could it improve bone health. And so that study 100% underpowered using only 3 grams. So I'm going to summarize for you. I'm almost at the end of my presentation. The general rule is that 5 grams a day is kind of the recommended dosing for the exercise community. Well, some authors think, well, if you use a little bit more, you might get other benefits to bone or brain or so forth. And creatine monohydrate at 20 grams or more really might be able to help boost brain health. So let me show you where that study comes from. And surprise, surprise, the research is mixed. What, Randy? You mean that experts don't agree? Nope. Experts don't agree on anything. I've learned this more in medicine. If I got a group of doctors together and asked them questions, they'd all have different opinions based on their life experience. So this research is mixed, but I'm going to show you some studies that talk about cognition and memory in sleep-deprived individuals who used at least 20 grams in a given dose. So let me show you there is no one size that fits all. Okay? Don't think that for a minute. There is no one size that fits all. You kind of have to experiment with this supplement. So let me show you the research here. This comes from a study that says when you choose dosing strategies, you can choose between a loading dose, a high dose for just a couple of days, or maintenance dosing. And you can choose a relatively low dose strategy or somewhere in between. Why would you choose that? Well, it kind of depends on a lot of things. It depends on your diet. I already told you, if you don't eat very much meat, you need more creatine. Maybe your baseline stores, how depleted you are when you're making this decision. What's your sex? Men have more creatine stored in their body because they have more muscle. And this is where creatine resides. What's your age? I guarantee you, I'm 53. I have more creatine in my body than a 63-year-old or a 73-year-old because I haven't lost that muscle mass. Listen, if I'm 53 now, in 10 years, I'm predicted by aging to have at least 10 to 15% less muscle mass just because of aging. So that should factor into the decision about if we choose to do a loading dose. What's the timing? How much do you exercise? What problem are you trying to solve? What clinical conditions do you have? This comes from this article, Advanced Exercise and Health Science. This is the graphic where they talk about how would someone decide what they want to do. Well, there was a study where they actually did MRIs, and they loaded this phosphate in creatine with a high energy phosphate so they could pick it up in the brain. This is how much this has been studied. And these findings would suggest, I'm reading the bottom, that the possibility of using oral creatine supplementation to modify brain high energy phosphate metabolism in subjects may help improve things like major depression, schizophrenia, cocaine and opiate abuse, because the brain alteration in high energy phosphate occurs in those conditions. So I thought that was so cool that they've actually done MRI or PET scan and tried to see how much creatine gets into the brain after you take an oral dose of it. Fascinating, right? This was a 6-month study looking at using 4 grams a day for 6 months. And it made an improvement in individuals with long COVID fatigue syndrome. Well, that's pretty fascinating. I wish I'd known that, 3 years ago. I'd used more creatine. So I developed the opinion that creatine is probably similar to using high dosing or mega dosing or pharmaceutical dosing of other nutrients. Now, if you've been with me for 8 years, you know I believe in high dose L-methylfolate for brain health. You have to get far more than what you get in a multivitamin. You don't get enough in a multivitamin. You need much higher dosing. We need much higher dosing of vitamin B1. It's been studied in neurodegenerative disease, and the Alzheimer's Association right now is doing a $45 million study looking at pharmaceutical dosing of vitamin B1, benfotiamine. You all know that I'm a huge proponent of high dose B12 for neuropsychiatric conditions. I'm a huge fan and an advocate of using high dose omega-3 in chronic inflammatory conditions or autoimmune disease or heart disease or post-concussive syndrome or TBI. I'm a huge believer in higher dose vitamin D3 because it changes the way our immune system functions and lowers the risk of chronic cancers. I'm a big fan of using higher dose vinpocetine for individuals at risk of TIA and stroke. I've lectured about this all across the country. And now I am adding an opinion that we can use higher dose creatine in seniors that have these muscle wasting conditions of weakness, falls, confusion, dementia, sundowning, depression, fatigue, and just general weakness. They're just old. I believe that. I think it can be done. So here's this study I want to show you. I spent a lot of time reading through this and doing the math and calculating and contemplating this. In this study, they took young people and they made them sleep deprived. And they had a placebo group and a creatine group. The placebo group, they gave them cornstarch. They mixed cornstarch in a liquid and had them drink it. Didn't do anything. And in the treatment group, they gave them a high dose of creatine. And they made them stay up all night long. They sleep deprived them. And so let me walk you through these studies. 15 healthy subjects, 8 women and 7 men. They didn't have any mental illness or psychiatric conditions. They didn't use alcohol or drugs. And they usually slept from about 11 at night till 7 in the morning. They did the sleep deprivation protocol in a hospital so they could observe them. And they visually monitored them. And if it looked like they were falling asleep, they went and stimulated them, woke them up. They would not let them sleep all night long. And they dosed them with a high dose of creatine at 8:30 on the night they were sleep deprived. Okay? They gave them 0.35 grams per kilogram. The placebo group, they gave them cornstarch. And then the treatment group, they gave them this huge dose of creatine. If I was in that study, I would have taken 33 grams of creatine. Now, I showed you the upper end of dosing is like 20 grams, but if I was in this study, I weighed 205 pounds, my dose would have been 33 grams of creatine. They took their blood samples through the night and they measured their plasma levels of creatine. Creatine reached its peak level after 3 hours. So from the time they took this mega dose, 3 hours later, their plasma level was at the highest, and that's where it peaked out. And in the morning, after they were sleep deprived, they administered a neuropsychiatric battery. They had them to do almost the equivalent of a CNS vital signs test or a MoCA test, where they looked at their vigilance, their attention span, word memory test, digit span, spatial testing, multiple choice language testings, and they looked at their processing speeds. And then they were doing MRIs and looking at their brain function. And you can see all these really significant tests that they did. Here's where they're looking at their peak serum phosphocreatine levels. Okay? And they were looking at their blood counts at 6 p.m. and then at midnight and at 2 a.m. and at 4 a.m. You see all these peaks. This was a very in-depth study. Okay? Now look how cool this is. I'm going to make it easy for you to interpret. The gray area is the cornstarch group, and the red area is the creatine loading dose group. Look at the difference in the scoring between their word memory testing or their forward memory digit span testing. Look at the differences. You don't have to know anything other than how much separation there was from the cornstarch group to the creatine group. Look at their language differences. Their logic, looking at log pattern recognition of shapes, looking at numerical values and being able to do some computation. And the last one, not as good of a difference, but they were looking at their total attention span and reaction time as part of a psychomotor vigilance test. This is one dose of creatine. No loading dose. They didn't take it for 3 weeks. One stinking dose mixed in their drink. And look at the difference in one night. So you know where I'm heading with this. Look at the implication. Their conclusion is a high single dose of creatine can partially reverse metabolic alterations and fatigue-related cognitive deterioration. These results revised the established assumption that creatine supplementation only works if you take it over time for a long time. No, one dose can make a difference. And then this next part in blue, our study showed the effect of a high-dose creatine against sleep deprivation, induced deterioration in cognitive performance, lasting up to 9 hours and showing its maximum cognitive effect at 4 hours after the administrative dose. So I'm a translational medicine guy. This is what I think. Could this translate into using creatine in sundowning to improve nighttime confusion? How about all of our seniors who get more exhausted and more tired and more confused as the night goes on? If we know translationally from this study that 4 hours after taking a big dose, people just do better neurologically, then we could say, oh, if my dad starts tanking at 7 o'clock at night and gets confused, I'm going to give him a whopping dose of creatine at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because I'm going to peak his level by 7 p.m. and help him function the very best so I can get him to bed without having an absolute meltdown. That is a powerful concept in the world of dementia. Okay? The translation is what I just explained. Use of creatine 4 hours can predict less sundowning. So then how would you calculate this? Well, I did the math for you. If I took a 165-pound woman who every night starts sundowning and getting more confused and scratching and so forth, if I took the same calculation they did in that sleep deprivation study and I gave her zero point 0.3 milligrams of creatine and I multiplied it times her body weight, 165 pounds, and then divided it by the kilogram calculation, 2.2, then her dose would be 26 grams. So if I went down to Costco and I got Costco creatine and I see that one scoop has 5 grams in it, then 5 grams, it would take me 5 servings to get 25 grams. Remember, her functional dose, according to that study, if I'm translating the research, would be 26 grams. Her dose would be 25 with 5 scoops. My cost on that would be 0.23 cents per 5 grams. So if she got 5 doses of it, it'd be about $1.15. Now, to me, that's remarkable. It makes me frustrated that I didn't try this earlier. But I've done these testing with sundowners using ketones. I've done this testing using other things. I'd like to do this now with creatine. It's tasteless. We could put it in someone's drink. They wouldn't even know it's there if they had dementia. Naturally, it has to be done under doctor's orders. I get it. Isn't that fascinating? Okay, I'm going to wrap up. Let me stop sharing my screen. And if you have any questions or things you want to fire away, or if there's been some chats,